Welcome to the Funnel Effect.
Thanks. It's really great to be here for this one.
Today we are analyzing the paper ISIS-4, a randomized factorial trial assessing early oral Captopril, oral Mononitrate, and intravenous magnesium sulfate in 58,050 patients with suspected acute myocardial infarction. This report was authored by the ISIS-4 Collaborative Group and published in The Lancet on March 18, 1995.
And honestly, this is a truly landmark publication in the history of cardiology.
Yeah,
It's just one of the most important lessons in medical statistics ever printed, really.
absolutely. And before we get into the nitty-gritty of the drugs and the chemistry, and we are going to get very granular today, I think we just have to pause. We have to appreciate the sheer scale of this thing. I mean, 58,050 patients.
It is a staggering number.
Right.
To put that in perspective for you, most clinical trials, even the ones we consider really large today, might have maybe 3,000 or 4,000 participants.
Yeah, a few thousand is considered a big deal.
Exactly. But ISIS-4 had the population of a small city, all enrolled in a single medical trial.
And it wasn't just one hospital either. We are talking about 1,086 hospitals across 31 different countries.
Which is just wild to think about.
Right. The logistical coordination alone is mind-boggling because this was 1995. This was effectively pre-internet.
No emails, no instant cloud databases.
Exactly. Just fax machines, landlines, and mountains of paper forms.
And that scale isn't just for show, It is actually the central character of the story we're going to tell today.
The size is the point.
Precisely.
Yeah.
In the world of medical statistics, size really is everything. When you are looking for the truth, the absolute, unvarnished truth about whether a drug actually saves lives, you cannot rely on a handful of patients.
Because the data gets too noisy.
Right. You need an army, and ISIS-4 was that army.
So let's set the stage here a bit. It's the mid-90s.
Yep.
If you walked into an emergency room with a heart attack, an acute myocardial infarction, doctors already had some heavy hitters in their arsenal by that point, right?
They did. By 1995, we had established what we might call the pillars of survival.
Okay.
We knew that fibrinolytic therapy, these are the clot-busting drugs like streptokinase or TPA,
Yeah,
we knew they could dissolve the blockage causing the heart attack.
because a heart attack is essentially a plumbing problem, right? A blocked pipe.
Exactly. A clot in the coronary artery. So the fibrinolytics bust the clot. And we also knew that antiplatelet therapy, specifically aspirin, was absolutely crucial to stop that clot from growing or reforming once you busted it open.
Right, so the classic aspirin and clot buster combo, that was the gold standard of care at the time.
Exactly. Those two treatments alone had completely revolutionized cardiac care. They were already saving tens of thousands of lives globally.
But the medical community is never satisfied with just good enough.
Never. The pressing question in the 90s was basically, what else?
What else can we throw at it?
Right. What can we add to the standard cocktail to save even more heart muscle and ultimately keep more people alive?
And that brings us to our three contenders for this deep dive. The ISIS-4 team decided to throw three specific treatments into the medical arena, so to speak, to see if they could survive the scrutiny of a massive megatrial.
Yes. Three very different agents with three completely different mechanisms of action.
First up, we have Captopril.
Which is an ACE inhibitor, primarily known at the time for treating high blood pressure and chronic heart failure.
Right.
The hope there was that it could actually prevent the heart from failing acutely right after the infarction.
Okay, and we have Mononitrate.
A nitrate. And these have been used for over a century to treat angina, which is that severe chest pain associated with heart disease.
The classic nitroglycerin under the tongue.
Exactly. The question for ISIS-4 was whether they did more than just stop the pain. Could they actually stop the death of the heart muscle itself?
And finally, the third contender. The most controversial one of the bunch, magnesium sulfate.
Intravenous magnesium. It's just a simple electrolyte, very cheap, very simple, and at the time surrounded by an incredible amount of hype.
Oh, we are definitely going to get into that hype and the massive crash that followed later on. But the mission of ISIS-4 was to take these three treatments, which had all shown some promise in smaller studies, and subject them to the ultimate test.
Precisely. They wanted to know the bottom line. Do these drugs actually reduce mortality?
Not just treating the symptoms.
Right. Not just, does it make the EKG look a little better or does it lower blood pressure a few points, but does it actually keep the patient alive for the next 5 weeks?
And to answer that definitively, they needed a study design that was as clever as it was massive.
They did.
I want to stop you right there because the paper calls this a 2 by 2 by 2 factorial study.
Yes, 2 by 2 by 2.
And to the uninitiated listener, that sounds like a terrifying high school algebra problem. But this design is actually the engine that makes the whole machine run, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And honestly, without this specific design, we probably wouldn't have these reliable answers today. The factorial part is what allowed them to run what is effectively 3 massive trials for the price of 1.
Okay, walk us through the logistics of that. If I'm a patient entering the ER in 1994, and I consent to get enrolled in this trial, what exactly happens to me?
Okay, picture a decision tree in your mind. You enter the study. The very first randomization branch asks a simple question. Do you get Captopril or do you get the Captopril placebo? That is decision 1.
So coin flip number 1.
Right. Then, completely independently of that first result, there is coin flip number 2. Do you get Mononitrate or do you get its placebo?
Okay.
And finally, a third independent branch, coin flip number 3.
Yeah.
Do you get the intravenous magnesium or do you get the open control?
So just following that logic, I could end up with just Captopril. Or I could get Captopril and magnesium together. Or I could get the placebo royal flush, where I just get placebos for everything.
Exactly. This creates 8 distinct treatment groups. You have a group getting all 3 active drugs, a group getting absolutely none of them, and literally every combination in between.
But here's the part that always confuses me about factorial designs, and I'm sure some of you listening might be wondering the same thing.
Sure. If I am taking Captopril and magnesium, and I survive the heart attack, how do the researchers know which drug actually saved me? Isn't the data inherently muddy?
That is the most common fear when people first hear about factorial designs. But the math actually solves it beautifully, provided there isn't a massive interaction between the drugs.
How so?
Because the randomization is totally independent, the researchers can look at the entire pool of 58,000 patients to answer just the Captopril question.
Right.
They take everyone who got Captopril, regardless of whether they also got nitrate or magnesium, and they compare them against everyone who got the Captopril placebo.
Oh, I see. So the magnesium and nitrate users are basically evenly distributed on both sides of that Captopril equation.
Exactly. They wash out in the averages. The random noise cancels itself out perfectly across 58,000 people.
That is brilliant.
It really is. It allows you to use the full statistical power of the 58,000 patient cohort for each of the 3 separate questions. Because if you ran 3 separate trials, you would need, 150,000 patients to get this exact same level of certainty?
Give or take, yes. It is an incredibly efficient way to do medical research.
That is so smart. It effectively triples the value of every single patient enrolled.
It does.
Speaking of those patients, who were these 58,000 people? Were they hand-picked, perfect specimens of health, aside from the sudden heart attack?
Quite the opposite, actually, and that is a crucial strength of this particular study. This was designed as a large, simple trial.
Broad criteria.
Very broad. Basically, if a doctor suspected you were having an acute myocardial infarction and you arrived within 24 hours of the onset of your symptoms, you were eligible.
So they didn't filter out the elderly or the folks who were already really sick?
No, they didn't. In fact, 28% of the patients enrolled were over 70 years old.
Wow.
They included people who had already survived previous heart attacks. They included people with existing heart failure.
That is the real world. That's who actually shows up in the ER.
Exactly. The only people they excluded were those with a clear, absolute contraindication, meaning a specific documented medical reason why giving a certain drug would be actively dangerous.
Like if their blood pressure was already crashing.
Right. If a patient was in cardiogenic shock, where the heart is failing so badly it can't pump enough blood to keep the vital organs alive, or if they had severe, persistent hypotension, they were excluded.
Because giving blood pressure lowering drugs to someone whose blood pressure is already 0 is a bad idea.
Right, that would be malpractice. But otherwise, the prevailing philosophy for the doctors was, if you aren't sure, randomize them.
Yeah.
Enter them in the trial.
And I think it's really important to clarify the standard of care context here for the listeners.
Yes, very important.
These patients weren't being treated in a vacuum. They weren't being locked in a room and denied basic treatment just to test these new drugs.
That is a vital ethical and clinical point. This was entirely an add-on study. The scientific question wasn't Captopril versus nothing at all. It was Captopril versus placebo, but on top of the absolute best available care at the time.
Because the paper notes that 94% of these patients received antiplatelet therapy, mostly just standard aspirin.
Yes, and 70% received fibrinolytic therapy, those clot busters we talked about.
So the baseline survival rate for these folks was already much, much better than it would have been just 10 or 15 years prior.
Which means the bar for success for these new drugs was set extremely high. They had to provide an incremental, measurable benefit over an already highly effective standard protocol.
It's tough to improve on something that already works pretty well.
Exactly.
So let's dive right into the first contender, oral Captopril.
The ACE inhibitor.
Now let's get into the mechanical weeds of Captopril. You mentioned a term earlier, ventricular remodeling.
I did.
I think we really need to define that more sharply because remodeling sounds benign, right? It sounds like putting in new kitchen cabinets or knocking down a wall in your house.
Right, it sounds like an upgrade.
But in the heart, ventricular remodeling is a catastrophic event, isn't it?
It is essentially a slow-motion disaster for the patient.
Break that down for us.
When you have a massive heart attack, a specific patch of your heart muscle actually dies from lack of oxygen. That dead tissue is called the infarct.
Okay.
Now, over time, that dead tissue turns into scar tissue. And scar tissue is stiff. It doesn't stretch, and more importantly, it doesn't contract and pump like healthy muscle.
So you have a dead zone in the pump.
Exactly. But your body doesn't care. The rest of your body still demands the exact same amount of blood flow to keep you alive.
So the remaining healthy muscle has to pick up this slack?
It has to work much, much harder. It compensates. But under that intense, sudden mechanical stress, the left ventricle actually begins to change its physical geometry.
It changes shape.
Yes. Normally, your left ventricle is somewhat elliptical, shaped a bit like a football. It's an efficient shape for squeezing blood out. But under this stress, it dilates. It balloons out and becomes more spherical.
Like a basketball.
Right. And as it becomes spherical, the walls stretch out and thin down. It becomes a very weak, very inefficient bump. This process is driven partly by mechanical stress, but also heavily by a hormonal cascade in the body called the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system.
The RAS.
The RAAS, exactly.
And so Captopril targets that specific hormonal system.
Yes. Captopril is an angiotensin-converting enzyme inhibitor. It blocks ACE.
Okay, and what does blocking ACE actually do?
By blocking that specific enzyme, you drastically lower the levels of a hormone called angiotensin II in the bloodstream.
And angiotensin II is the bad guy here.
In this context, yes. It is a very potent vasoconstrictor, meaning it tightens up the blood vessels, raising blood pressure. And it's also a primary chemical signal that actively drives that spherical remodeling process in the heart tissue.
So by taking Captopril, you effectively unload the heart.
Exactly. You relax the blood vessels, which lowers the resistance the heart has to pump against what we call afterload. And simultaneously, you turn off the chemical signals that are telling the heart to stretch out and change shape.
So you are actively preserving the natural architecture of the pump.
That is the exact physiological theory.
That's a brilliant theory. It makes total logical sense. But as we know, we have seen plenty of great physiological theories completely fail in clinical practice.
We certainly have.
So how did they actually administer this drug in the trial?
They had to be very careful because, as we established, ACE inhibitors drop your blood pressure.
Right, and you don't want to bottom out a heart attack patient.
No, you don't. So they started with a very small initial test dose, just 6.25 milligrams.
Just to see how the patient reacts.
Exactly. The nurses and doctors watched the patient closely. If their blood pressure held up fine after a couple of hours, they gave a slightly bigger dose, and they eventually titrated it up to 50 milligrams twice a day and kept them on that for a full month.
Okay, so the moment of truth. The results. Did Captopril actually earn its place in the history books?
It absolutely did. The results were highly statistically significant. There was a 7% proportional reduction in 5-week mortality.
Okay, let's unpack that specific number. A 7% proportional reduction.
Yes.
To a layman listening to this, 7% sounds pretty borderline. I mean, if I got a 7% raise at my job, I wouldn't exactly be throwing a party.
No, you probably wouldn't. But context is literally everything here.
How so?
In a small trial of, say, 50 or 100 people, a 7% difference is just statistical noise. It means nothing. But in a massive trial of 58,000 people, a 7% difference is practically a rock-solid law of nature.
Because of the sample size.
Right. You have to look at the p-value. The p-value for the Captopril benefit in ISIS-4 was 0.002.
Which, for those who don't speak statistics, means what exactly?
It means there is only a 2 in 1,000 chance that this result was just a random fluke.
Wow. Okay, so it is undeniably real.
It is incredibly robust. And when you look at it clinically, a 7% reduction in death for a condition like heart attacks, which kills millions of people globally every year, that translates to thousands and thousands of actual lives saved.
The paper actually calculates it right.
Yes. It calculates as saving about 5 lives for every 1,000 patients treated.
5 lives per 1,000. That is essentially the number needed to treat, right?
Roughly, yes. You treat 200 people to save 1 life definitively.
And treating 200 people to save 1 life might not sound super efficient if the drug in question cost, $50,000 a pill.
Exactly. But Captopril is just an old blood pressure pill. It costs pennies. It's been off patent forever.
So the cost-effectiveness ratio is just off the charts.
It is one of the best bargains in all of modern medicine.
Here is where it gets really interesting for me, diving into the subgroups. The paper mentions that Captopril actually worked a lot better for some people than it did for others.
Yes, the high-risk subgroups. That is a really key nuance in the data. The benefit wasn't just a flat 7% across the board for everyone.
Okay, break that down.
If you look closely at the subgroup analysis, I believe it's figure 3 in the paper, the survival curves diverge much, much more sharply for the high-risk patients.
Who counts as high risk?
Specifically, patients who had a history of previous heart attacks or patients who presented with visible clinical signs of active heart failure.
So the sicker the patient was, the more the drug actually helped them.
Exactly. In those specific high-risk groups, you weren't just saving 5 lives per 1,000. You were saving about 10 or maybe even 12 lives per 1,000 treated.
That is a massive jump.
It is, and it makes perfect physiological sense when you think about it.
Because their hearts are already on the brink.
Right. If your heart is already heavily damaged from a prior infarct, or it's currently failing to pump effectively, preventing any further spherical remodeling is even more critical to keeping you alive, you have 0 reserve left.
That makes total sense. Now, did the survival benefit actually last?
What do you mean?
Well, they only took pills for a month, right?
Yeah.
Did the survival curves just merge back together after they stopped taking the medication? Like, did it just delay the inevitable by a few weeks?
That is the true beauty of this intervention. The survival advantage that they measured so clearly at 1 month was completely maintained at 12 months.
Oh, wow.
Yes. The lives saved stayed saved. If you look at the long-term charts, the curves remain totally parallel out to a year.
So intervening early permanently altered their trajectory.
Exactly. This strongly suggests that the early intervention with the ACE inhibitor prevented those early fatal remodeling events, and those survivors didn't just turn around and die a few months later from something else, they went on living.
Now, obviously, no drug is completely without side effects. Captopril lowers blood pressure by design.
It does.
Did that cause major problems in the trial?
It did cause some issues, as they fully expected. There was a definite increase in hypotension, clinically significant low blood pressure, that was severe enough that doctors actually had to stop the treatment in some of the patients.
Okay.
And there was also some evidence of transient renal dysfunction, kidney issues.
That sounds pretty concerning for a patient already in crisis.
It is concerning, and it's why doctors have to monitor these patients very closely. But the study analyzed this safety aspect incredibly rigorously.
And what did they find?
They found that even among the specific patients who developed that severe hypotension, there was absolutely no excess in mortality in the first few days.
So the low blood pressure didn't kill them.
No. The massive benefits of preventing the heart failure completely outweighed the risks of temporarily lowering the blood pressure.
Provided you don't do something foolish.
Provided, and this is the vital caveat, provided you don't blindly give it to patients who are already in cardiogenic shock. That would be disastrous.
Right. So looking at the final scorecard for contender number 1, Captopril is a definitive win.
A huge win. It permanently altered the standard of care globally.
All right, let's move on to contender number 2, oral mononitrate.
The nitrates.
As you mentioned earlier, these were already incredibly famous drugs. If you had an uncle or grandfather with bad angina, he almost certainly carried those little nitroglycerin tablets in his pocket.
Very likely, yes. Nitrates are powerful vasodilators.
And it opened things up.
Exactly. They relax the smooth muscle lining the blood vessels. This opens up the veins and the arteries, which obviously improves blood flow. But critically, in a heart attack, it dramatically reduces what we call preload.
Preload. Define that for us.
Preload is essentially the sheer volume of blood that is returning to the heart from the venous system, filling up the ventricle before it pumps.
Okay, so it's the amount of fluid the heart has to deal with on every beat.
Exactly. By dilating the venous system, nitrates cool some of that blood in the periphery, in your arms and legs, so less blood rushes back to the heart all at once.
Which means the heart doesn't have to work as hard to pump it all out.
Precisely. You are decreasing the mechanical workload on a muscle that is actively dying from lack of oxygen.
So the logic seems incredibly sound. If you reduce the heart's workload right in the middle of a heart attack, you should logically limit the final size of the tissue damage and ultimately save lives. It's very similar to the Captopril logic, just coming at it from a slightly different mechanical angle.
That was the exact hypothesis, and it wasn't just a theory either. Prior to ISIS-4, there had been a meta-analysis, a statistical pooling of data from a bunch of previous, much smaller trials that heavily suggested routine nitrates could reduce heart attack mortality by up to one-third.
One-third. A 33% reduction in death. That is massive.
It is. If that were actually true, it would be an absolute miracle drug.
So expectations going into this trial must have been sky high.
They were very, very high. So ISIS-4 set out to test a controlled release formulation of mononitrate, taken once daily for a full month, to see if that 30% reduction was actually real in a massive population.
And the envelope, please. What happened?
It wasn't real.
Just completely flatlined.
Effectively, yes.
Yeah.
Total flatline. When the statisticians looked at the survival curves for the mononitrate group versus the placebo group, they were virtually superimposable. They just tracked right on top of each other.
So a promised 30% reduction evaporated into a 0% reduction.
The raw numbers tell the whole story. There were 2,129 deaths in the mononitrate group versus 2,190 deaths in the placebo group.
That is basically identical in a pool of 58,000.
Statistically, that is a completely non-significant difference.
So all that hope, all that intense expectation built up from the smaller trials, it just vanished upon closer inspection.
It completely vanished. And honestly, this is the very first real hint of the funnel effect that we are discussing today.
How so?
The smaller trials had very clearly overestimated the real-world benefit, likely due to a combination of random chance and publication bias. When you shone the massive spotlight of 58,000 patients onto the question, the statistical illusion disappeared.
Now, I want to play devil's advocate here because I can hear the critics already.
Let's hear it.
A lot of doctors might say, well, hold on, maybe the trial failed because everyone in the hospital was already taking nitrates anyway. I know that in many hospitals, if you come through the ER doors clenching your chest, the first thing they do is slap a nitro-paste patch on you immediately. Did that background noise completely mess up the study data?
It is a very valid critique, and it was raised immediately. But the researchers, being brilliant, fully anticipated this exact problem.
So how did they account for it?
Well, they openly acknowledged that about half the patients in the overall study did, in fact, receive non-study nitrates, like that nitro patch you just mentioned, simply at the clinical discretion of their treating doctors.
Right, so that would naturally dilute the final results, because if your placebo group is actually taking the active drug off-label, it's not really a placebo group anymore.
It would absolutely dilute the effect, yes. But here is the genius of the 58,000 patient sample size. ISIS-4 was so massively large that they had enough statistical power to look specifically at the subgroup of patients who definitively received no other nitrates whatsoever.
The totally clean, pristine patients.
Exactly, the virgin patients. If the study drug actually worked to save lives, it should have shown a massive, undeniable survival benefit in that specific subgroup.
And did it?
It did not.
Even in the clean group.
Even in the patients who received absolutely no other background nitrates, there was zero significant survival benefit from the mononitrate. The curve remained flat.
So, does this mean we should just throw nitrates in the trash entirely? Are they useless?
Oh, not at all. And the authors of the paper are extremely clear on this point.
Okay, clarify that for us.
Nitrates remain excellent, incredibly useful drugs for immediate symptom relief.
Right, the angina.
Yes. If a patient is lying in the bed with ongoing crushing chest pain, or if their blood pressure is dangerously spiking, nitrates are fantastic for managing those symptoms.
They make the patient feel better.
Yes, and they are very safe. The study clearly showed there was no excess in deaths from taking them.
So they don't hurt you.
Right. But the definitive conclusion of ISIS-4 is that doctors shouldn't be prescribing them routinely to every single heart attack patient with the false expectation that it will prolong their life.
We use them to treat the pain, not to treat death.
Exactly. That is a very crucial clinical distinction. Symptom management versus actual mortality reduction.
Yeah.
They are two entirely different things.
All right, so let's update our scorecard. We have one definitive win with Captopril. We have one draw with Mononitrate.
Yep.
And now we come to the main event of this episode, the heavy hitter, the real controversy, intravenous magnesium.
Oh, yes. This is where the story of this trial takes a truly dramatic, almost shocking turn.
I really want to set the scene for the listeners regarding magnesium because it's hard to overstate the mood at the time. Before ISIS-4 came out, magnesium was basically the golden child of cardiology, wasn't it?
It was. It was viewed almost as a miracle intervention.
Why was everyone so incredibly excited about a basic electrolyte?
Because the underlying physiological theory was incredibly attractive, almost perfect.
Let's hear the theory.
Magnesium is absolutely essential for normal cellular function. But in the specific context of a heart attack, it acts as a natural calcium antagonist.
And why does the heart care about calcium during a heart attack?
During severe ischemia, when the heart muscle is starving for oxygen, the individual muscle cells suddenly get overloaded with massive amounts of calcium rushing in.
Okay.
This severe calcium overload directly leads to cell death. And perhaps even more dangerously, it triggers fatal, chaotic electrical arrhythmias in the heart.
Arrhythmias are those sudden, irregular heart rhythms that can just kill you instantly, right? Like going into cardiac arrest.
Correct. The heart just stops pumping and starts quivering.
Right.
So the prevailing theory was that flooding the system with intravenous magnesium would effectively block this toxic calcium rush, protect the dying heart muscle cells, and stabilize the electrical rhythm of the heart.
Okay, that sounds like a great theory. But they must have had data to back up this hype, right? It wasn't just entirely theoretical.
Oh, they had data. They had a very famous meta-analysis of several prior small trials that actually suggested intravenous magnesium slashed death rates by 50%.
Wait, 50%?
50%.
That is staggering. That is significantly better than aspirin. That's better than the clotbusters.
It was an absolutely astonishing number. If true, it would be the most effective cardiac drug ever discovered. And then, to add fuel to the fire, there was the Limit 2 trial.
What was Limit 2?
It was a very well-respected, reasonably large trial of about 2,000 patients, published just a few years before ISIS-4. And Limit 2 showed a statistically significant 24% reduction in mortality with magnesium.
So you have small studies screaming about a 50% benefit and a solid medium-sized study proving a 24% benefit.
Right.
It looks like a total slam dunk. Magnesium is cheap as dirt. It's a simple IV bag. It's widely considered totally safe. Why wouldn't a doctor just give it to everyone automatically?
That was exactly the prevailing mood. In fact, many prominent cardiologists felt it was borderline unethical to even conduct a placebo-controlled trial like ISIS-4 for magnesium.
Because they thought it was already proven.
Exactly. They genuinely believed they would be actively denying a proven, life-saving cure to the poor patients who ended up in the control group.
Wow. Okay, so enter the juggernaut, ISIS-4. They randomize the patients. What actually happened?
They randomized 58,000 patients. Half got a 24-hour continuous intravenous magnesium infusion, half got the open control.
And the result?
The result was an absolute shockwave through the medical community. Not only was there no massive 50% benefit, not only was there no 24% benefit, there was actually a clear signal of harm.
Harm? You mean it made things worse?
The raw mortality rate was actually higher in the group that received the magnesium.
You have got to be kidding.
There were 2,216 deaths in the magnesium group, compared to only 2,103 deaths in the control group.
Wait, so instead of saving half the people, this miracle electrolyte was actively killing people?
Now, statisticians will point out that the increase wasn't technically significant in the strict sense that it completely crossed the p-value threshold for definitive harm.
Okay, so it could have been the slight chance.
Right. But the confidence intervals completely, totally excluded any realistic possibility of a benefit. The grand idea that routine magnesium saved lives was definitively mathematically dead.
And looking at the side effects profile in the paper, it wasn't just harmless salt water, was it?
Not at all. There was a highly significant excess of active heart failure and severe cardiogenic shock directly in the magnesium group right during the 24-hour infusion period.
So it was actively hurting the heart's ability to pump.
Yes. There was also a significant increase in severe bradycardia, which is a dangerous slowing of the heart rate, and widespread cutaneous flushing, where the patient feels a terrible burning sensation all over their skin.
So just to summarize this disaster, you are making the damaged heart pump worse. You are actively slowing it down to dangerous levels. You are making the patient feel like they are literally burning up on the inside.
And you aren't doing a single thing to actually save their life.
That is just
It was
brutal.
a very hard pill to swallow for a lot of doctors.
But this is where I get a little skeptical as an observer. You have the Limit 2 trial, right? Which wasn't a tiny study. It had 2,000 people.
Right.
And Limit 2 clearly showed that the magnesium worked. Then ISIS-4 comes along and says it completely doesn't. Why should we inherently trust the bigger one? Couldn't the bigger one just be clumsy? Like maybe they messed up the execution because it was so huge.
You have hit exactly on the primary accusation that was leveled at ISIS-4 the day it was published. The critics coined the term megatrial bias.
What does that mean?
They forcefully argued that in the desperate attempt to enroll 58,000 people across 31 countries, the protocol just inherently became far too loose and sloppy.
Okay, what was their specific complaint?
The main argument was timing. They said ISIS-4 gave the magnesium way too late. The median time to treatment in ISIS-4 was around 8 hours after the heart attack started.
Which is a long time when heart muscle is dying.
Exactly, the critics argued. You completely missed the therapeutic window. The cells are already dead at 8 hours. You can't use magnesium to save dead cells.
Which logically is a very fair critique, isn't it? If the drug specifically works by protecting cells from dying, giving it 8 hours after the event is like calling the fire department the day after your house has completely burned to the ground.
It is a totally fair critique in theory. But here is the brilliance of the ISIS-4 team. They entirely anticipated this exact argument. They didn't just ignore the critique. They used their massive data to destroy it.
How?
They systematically broke down the data by time to treatment. Because the trial was so huge, they literally had thousands and thousands of patients who received the magnesium very early, well within the first 4 hours, and thousands more within 6 hours.
Ah, okay. So they could look at just the early birds, and what did they find?
Total flatline. No benefit whatsoever.
Hmm.
Even when given extremely early, right in the optimal golden window the critics demanded, the survival curves were perfectly superimposed. It did nothing.
Wow. Okay, so the you gave it too late argument completely collapses under the weight of the data.
Completely.
What about the other argument I read about, the reperfusion issue? I saw that some doctors fiercely argued that magnesium only worked if you specifically did not use the clot-busting drugs.
Yes, that was another major hypothesis, trying to rescue the magnesium theory.
Did ISIS-4 address that?
It was another hypothesis, utterly crushed by the sheer volume of data. ISIS-4 had enough statistical power to separate out the patients based on what other treatments they got.
And the results?
Among the tens of thousands of patients who got the clot busters,
Mm.
absolutely no magnesium benefit. Among the thousands who strictly did not get clot busters, absolutely no magnesium benefit.
Okay, what about the dose itself, or how fast they dripped the YV? Maybe they gave it wrong.
ISIS-4 deliberately used a dosing regimen that was virtually identical to the one used in the Limit 2 trial, the exact trial that had been positive. So you couldn't blame the dosage or the infusion rate at all.
This is fascinating. It effectively dismantled every single excuse, one by one. It feels like ISIS-4 was designed specifically to corner these critics and just systematically eliminate their arguments.
That is precisely the terrifying power of the funnel effect. When you have this massive amount of data, there's absolutely nowhere for the bias or the random chance to hide.
The truth just forces its way out.
Exactly. The paper states very plainly that the massive numbers, 58,000 patients, provide reliable, definitive evidence that simply outweighs the random error and noise of the much smaller studies.
And this brings us right to the core philosophical lesson of this entire episode, the funnel effect of data.
Yes.
Can you explain to the listeners exactly what we mean by that term in the context of probability in medical research?
Sure. Imagine a giant physical funnel in your mind.
Okay.
At the very wide top of the funnel, you have all the small medical studies.
Yeah.
Because the patient numbers are so low, the data points effectively spray everywhere wildly.
Lots of variance.
Huge variance. You might get one small study showing a 50% benefit and another identically sized study showing no benefit at all, or even harm, simply by pure random chance.
Like flipping a coin. If you flip a coin 10 times and you get 7 heads, it doesn't mean the coin is magically rigged. It's just a small sample size. It's noise.
Exactly. But as you travel down the funnel, and the studies get larger and larger, say 58,000 times.
You enter the very narrow neck of the funnel at the bottom.
Right. And down there in the narrow neck, all that wild variance completely disappears. The result strictly converges on the actual truth. If the truth of nature is this drug has no benefit, The mega trial will undeniably show no benefit.
So all those early small trials that showed a massive 50% benefit for magnesium, that wasn't fraud, that was just statistical noise?
It was almost certainly statistical noise, heavily amplified by something called publication bias.
Ah, right. The infamous file drawer problem.
Exactly. It's a huge issue in science. Think
Yeah.
about it. If you run a small, underfunded study on a new supplement and you find absolutely nothing happens, what do?
You probably just throw the data in a drawer and move on to the next project. You don't bother publishing it.
Right. The journals don't want to publish boring negative results. But if you run a small study and by total random chance, you happen to find a miracle 50% reduction in death.
You get published immediately on the front page of a major medical journal. You get interviewed on the news.
Exactly. So when a working doctor looks back at the published literature, it really looks like the drug is a miracle. But they are completely blind. They are only seeing the winning lottery tickets. They never see the millions of losing tickets hidden in the file drawers.
That is honestly terrifying because real doctors are reading those exact journals and treating real patients based on those random winning lottery tickets.
It is terrifying. And that is exactly why the ISIS-4 trial is so historically important. It definitively proved that you cannot blindly trust the wide, noisy top of the funnel. You absolutely need the narrow neck. You need the mega trial to find the truth.
The paper repeatedly mentions the term confidence intervals. This is a statistical term that usually makes people's eyes just completely glaze over, but it seems incredibly crucial to understanding this.
It is. A confidence interval is essentially the lens through which we view scientific reality.
Give us an example.
When you have a very small study, your confidence interval is incredibly wide. You are essentially saying to the world, based on my data, I am confident the true benefit of this drug is somewhere between 0% and 50%.
Which isn't very precise or helpful at all. It's like a weatherman saying, I think the temperature tomorrow will be somewhere between 0 degrees and 100 degrees.
Right.
You can't plan your day or your outfit based on that forecast.
Exactly. But with an army of 58,000 patients, that confidence interval tightens right up. ISIS-4 was able to say with extremely high mathematical certainty, the true effect of intravenous magnesium is somewhere exactly between a 0% benefit and a very tiny amount of active harm.
So it completely mathematically ruled out those massive 20 or 30% benefits that people were desperately hoping for.
It shut the door on the hype forever.
So let's talk about the actual real-world clinical implications of all this. This massive study came out in The Lancet in 1995. What actually changed on the ground in hospitals the next day?
Well, it changed almost everything about acute cardiac care. First and foremost, Captopril and the other ACE inhibitors became the absolute standard of care.
Right.
If you suffer a heart attack today, especially a severe one that damages the pump, you're almost certainly going home with a prescription for an ACE inhibitor. That standard is a direct, undeniable result of this specific trial data.
And what about magnesium? Did it just disappear?
It effectively vanished from the routine standard heart attack protocols.
Yeah.
It went from being the absolute next big thing in cardiology to being relegated back to a niche drug.
Niche for what?
Doctors still use it for specific, documented electrolyte deficiencies or for treating very specific, weird types of arrhythmias like Tresize de points.
But for just a routine heart attack rolling through the door?
Gone. Completely removed from the algorithm.
And the nitrates.
The nitrates stayed around, but their clinical role was drastically redefined by this data. They are now explicitly for patient comfort, not for cure. We completely stopped fooling ourselves that we were actually saving lives with a nitro patch.
I really want to touch on the specific cost-effectiveness argument that the authors make near the end of the paper.
That's a great point.
They mention that saving just 5 lives per 1,000 patients treated might not sound like a huge medical victory, but because Captopril is fully off patent and incredibly cheap, it is highly efficient for the system.
This is a totally critical point for large healthcare systems and governments. If a brand new, highly complex biotech treatment costs $50,000 a dose and it only saves 1 life per 1,000 treated, that intervention might not actually be sustainable for a national health system.
It would bankrupt the system.
Exactly. But Captopril cost literal pennies per pill. The paper estimates the actual cost per life saved was just a few £1,000s, which, in the context of modern medical economics, is an absolute steal. It's a bargain.
It's amazing how a dirt-cheap, totally unglamorous little white pill can vastly outperform the hyped-up magic bullets if you just have the sheer volume of data to prove it.
And that is exactly the enduring power of the large, simple trial design. It is specifically designed to detect those modest incremental benefits.
Because the big wins are already taken.
Right. In modern medicine, we have already picked all the low-hanging fruit. We discovered antibiotics, we discovered vaccines. We are going to find many new simple things that magically slash mortality by 50% anymore.
We are fighting for inches now.
Exactly. We're looking for the subtle interventions that cut mortality by 5%, 7%, maybe 10%.
And to definitively find a 7% difference amid all the chaos of human biology, you need 50,000 people. You simply cannot find a true 7% signal in a 100-person study. It completely gets lost in the noise.
Exactly right. Think about it. If the ISIS-4 team had only managed to enroll 2,000 patients instead of 58,000, they very likely might have missed the Captopril benefit entirely.
Because it would have just looked like statistical noise.
Right. It wouldn't have reached significance.
So in that alternate universe, Captopril would have just been thrown in the exact same trash can alongside the magnesium.
Quite possibly. And as a direct result, thousands and thousands of people globally would have died entirely unnecessarily from heart failure over the following decades.
Wow. That really raises the stakes of getting the statistics right. It's not just about debunking the bad drugs. It's about rescuing the truly good ones from obscurity.
It is about absolute certainty. The true legacy of ISIS-4 isn't just proving which drugs worked. It is the methodology itself. It forcefully cemented the modern era of evidence-based medicine.
It changed how we think.
It taught an entire generation of doctors to be deeply skeptical of small trials and beautiful biological theories. Just because a drug really should work based on the biology doesn't actually mean it does work in a messy human being.
So, to finally recap our definitive scorecard for today's deep dive, Captopril is the undisputed winner. Roughly 5 actual lives saved per 1,000 patients treated, with double that benefit in the sickest, high-risk patients.
Correct. A major victory.
Mononitrate comes out as a draw. It is great for relieving chest pain, but completely neutral for extending life.
Correct.
And magnesium is the definitive loser of the trial. Completely ineffective for survival, possessing a real potential for active harm, and ultimately serving as a massive cautionary tale about blindly believing the medical hype.
A definitive, sobering loss.
You know, discussing all of this today really makes me look at modern medical news headlines totally differently. Every single week you hear small study shows dark chocolate cures cancer, or new dietary supplement reverses brain aging.
And if you ever look closely at the fine print of those sensational studies, they usually have an N of 30 or 50 patients.
They are living right at the wide, noisy top of the funnel.
Exactly. It is mostly noise.
It really makes you wonder, and this is a bit of a provocative thought to leave you, our listeners, with today, how many other totally standard treatments that doctors use every single day right now are actually just based on those noisy small studies?
It is exactly the kind of question that keeps clinical epidemiologists up late at night.
How many modern miracle cures would completely crumble into dust if we actually subjected them to the merciless scrutiny of 58,000 patients? Are we still routinely prescribing the 1995 equivalent of magnesium for other diseases right now, simply because nobody has bothered to do the mega trial yet?
It is almost a mathematical certainty that we are. The funnel effect is a universal, unforgiving law of statistics. It absolutely doesn't just apply to cardiology or heart attacks. It applies to every single branch of medicine.
Well, that is a deeply sobering thought, but I think it is also a very empowering one. It reminds all of us exactly why science has to be a continuous process, not just a final destination. We have to continually keep testing, keep expanding the data numbers, and keep fearlessly challenging the known truths.
Ideally, yes. True medical knowledge is only valuable when it is rigorously tested. And the ISIS-4 trial remains an absolute monument to that kind of rigor.
Well, on that note, we have finally reached the end of our very deep dive into ISIS-4. It is an incredible story of huge numbers, broken hearts, and the very hard, unyielding truths of medical science.
A truly fascinating journey to unpack.
Thank you for watching The Funnel Effect.